Single salute. I'm Lord Maitreya, the hip hop futurist. You're now tuned into the Super Longevity Institute podcast. Today, I have two special guests. Robert Hieronimus and Laura E. Cortner co-authored titles including Founding Fathers, Secret Societies, the United States Symbolism of America, and Inside the Yellow Submarine. Laura Cortner works appears regularly in Fate magazine and in several Beatles publications. She's the director of the Russell Comby Mansion Community Health Center. Dr. Hieronimus is an educator, artist, author, and activist. In the 60s, Dr. Hieronimus traveled with electro records and recording artists such as Jimi Hendrix, The Doors, Janis Joplin, to design posters and album covers and share info on the esoterica. In 1969, he co-founded the first state-approved school of esoteric studies in the country, which granted certificates in occult sciences, mystic arts, and religious metaphysics. PBS documented his leadership and contributions in 1971 with the feature artist of Savatria, produced by Maryland Public Television, seen nationwide. He continued his study of ancient cultures and symbolism independently with a particular emphasis on the founding of America. In 1981, Dr. Hieronimus was awarded a PhD from Saybrook Graduate School for his doctoral thesis and historic analysis of the reverse of the American Great Seal and its relationship to the ideology of humanistic psychology. Wow. Dr. Hieronimus has a long career as a muralist and a painter. His occult and symbolic murals include the 2,700 square foot prophetic apocalypse completed during 1968 and 1969 at John Hopkins University. Transhumanists, futurists, hip hoppers worldwide, I want to give a warm welcome to Laura Cortner and Dr. Hieronimus. Thank you for coming on the show. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you for inviting us.
Thank you for having us. This is really exciting for us as well. Seen your show. It's really interesting. It should be an interesting exploration of the Yellow Submarine with quantum hip hop.
Yes, I definitely want to bring this knowledge to the hip hop community because I know what they talk about. And they're starting out where I started out maybe 15 years ago. Let me just tell you how I got involved with some of your work. Maybe like 10, 15 years ago, I worked at East West Books, and I started to hear you. I read the Founding Fathers. I read all this book about, I read the Statue of Liberty book. I was just like, wow, this guy's books is like no other. And I was really interested in the reverse of the seal. So that's how and we had books at East West Books, which had a bunch of metaphysical books, Buddhism, science. I learned about Ray Kurzweil there. It was one of the best experiences of my life. And I was only paid like $8 an hour. I loved it. I didn't want to leave.
Being paid.
I was like, damn, the money. I'll stay broke. I can read all year. I had books underneath my pillow. It was crazy. Books at my feet. It was crazy. My mother was like, what's wrong with this boy? He wants to do is read all day.
Right.
So
there's so much to learn, so little time.
Yes. So how did y'all get in? How did y'all meet?
How did we meet?
Oh, was I working any murals then?
You were working on the E Pluribus Unum.
Oh, the E
mural
Pluribus
when
Unum,
I first
yeah.
met you.
The one that we did for Lexington Market, which is still hidden, by the way.
Wow.
You got to get it out in the open, and it dealt with, of course, the importance of higher consciousness. As a matter of fact, that's what I'm, and you're probably ahead of me on a lot of this stuff, but the key thing is that at this time in the history of the world, we are in a situation in which we must rejoin and come together. I know it may sound corny, but if we do not, with what's coming on with our weather, that tells us that all coastal areas are going to be flooded.
Yeah.
And not only that, if you think the middle of the country is not going to be flooded, you're wrong. All of the water that's up there in the Great Lakes is going to be coming pulled down into Louisiana, and the center of our country will be flooded. So we're we've got some rough things that are coming ahead, and we are going to have to look out for each other.
Yeah,
That's what we're supposed to. I'm going to say something that most people are going to say is a little corny, Bob, but look, the key to everything is prayer, meditation, and then service to others.
It's a 1, 2, 3.
It's that simple.
Hey, I'm not going to disagree with that.
To higher consciousness.
Yep, you don't need drugs.
You don't need drugs. You don't, it's all inside of you. You've got higher consciousness within you that needs to come out now so that the planet can put itself back together, because it's not just us being flooded, it's every continent on the earth is going to go through that process. And people have not taken this seriously. And every time I've ever talked on the radio, and being interviewed, they would not allow me to talk about it. They said, "Oh, that's negative. That's negative." Well, that's what's coming.
Well, that was then, and now we're not even allowed to say the word global warming because people have said it so often. That's not exactly how we met, not an answer to your question, but I was hired as an assistant to help him with his murals and his writing, and I thought it would be for a couple of years, but it turned out to be just like you. I was captivated by what he was putting out about the Great Seal and the Earth changes. That was very compelling for me as well. And he has a library from the old Aum Esoteric Study Center that's still intact, and that's what really did it for me. The smell of a library. I think you can relate to that. The smell of old books, and these books that you can't really find anywhere that are not printed anymore, but from the old Eastern and Western mystical traditions. And I just felt like you, compelled to read everything I possibly could, because my life paradigm was shifting as soon as I learned the Hieronimus code, so to speak, which is really not the Hieronimus code, but that was my portal to understanding that there's more out there than the way I was brought up in the strict Protestant white bread tradition, that this is the way things are. And as soon as I started to question that and realize that most of the world doesn't believe that way, and there are other traditions that are just as valuable, it started me on a course like you, and like probably most of your listeners, to figure out, why are we here? What is our purpose in life? Each one comes to Earth with a purpose, and your job is to figure out what that purpose is.
I always believe that. It's funny you should say that. I always believe that.
But you can find out your purpose literally through going through this process of prayer, meditation. Prayer, you are listening to the higher consciousness. And when you get into meditation, it's actually reverse, isn't it?
No, prayer, meditation, service.
And then but service is the thing that locks it in.
And
helping
most people
others.
Leave out.
Yeah, unfortunately. There's a lot of Christianity now that is leaving that out. We're not looking out for each other anymore. And you take a look at Trump's people, that's where they're at.
Yes.
Well, they get caught up in the dogma and the law of the Old Testament, not just they almost disregard the New Testament. I shouldn't speak so generalistically, but you're right in terms of the Jesus version of Christianity was all about do unto others as you would have them do unto you.
Right.
The golden
very simple.
And if the way they're going around treating other people certainly isn't the Jesus way of doing things.
Yeah.
In my opinion. Anyway.
You guys look really nice, by the way. The background looks great. Earrings looks lovely. This scarf looks nice. His hat looks nice. I'm like, wow, y'all look great. I love the background.
Scarves.
I love your scarf. Y'all look great. I just wanted to compliment you on how y'all look.
Well, it's a form of low magic. You surround yourself with what's important to you. And right now, what's important to us is this book about the Yellow Submarine. So we've got them everywhere, toys, images all over the walls. But if you're studying Buddhism, then you surround yourself with symbols of Buddhism. And if you're studying Hinduism, likewise, whatever it is that you're trying to learn more about, you surround yourself with it and immerse yourself in it. And it starts to, you start to read those books under your pillow at night.
And then your books get to be 600 and 700 pages. And
that takes me forever to get. The Ego and the Shield is that thick. The one I got it. As soon as you recommended it, I went and got it. And it was cheap.
That's a hard one to find. Wow.
It was cheap. I was
Eagle and the Shield. Remember that? Patterson Dougal?
Yes. And that's Patterson. I'm so glad you mentioned his name. because there's so much misinformation about the eye and the triangle and the pyramid. And that's where Patterson and I really agreed on. And he, as a matter of fact, he introduced me literally to people within our government, because they realized after they read my book that even though I did attack them and saying, what about using higher consciousness here? Then later on, they just said, well, okay, it's understandable. And really meant a lot to me that my work is used by our government.
Yeah, for those who don't know, The Eagle and the Shield was written or published by the State Department, I think it was. It's an official book, and it's the official history. It's about that big of the United States Great Seal. You all know it from your $1 bill. The front side has the eagle with the shield, and the back side has the pyramid with the eye and the triangle, which has been incredibly misinterpreted by conspiracy theorists over the years. And that's what Bob's work is about, basically trying to find out what the founders really thought about it when they chose that as a symbol, what they thought it meant, because that's all that really matters.
Yes.
And it meant something completely different to the Christian deists of the day than it does to the Christians of today, who are afraid of it and find it satanic. Yes. It's because it's linked to Freemasonry, and anything that's tainted with Freemasonry, and it's a black and white issue with them. If the Freemasons used it, it must be satanic, which again is a whole nother topic. But the eye and the triangle is a symbol for God. That's what it always has been, and it's in lots and lots of medieval Christian churches, and they were not offended by it. So the founding fathers chose it as a symbol to show that America had a destiny, in their opinion, to raise up the rest of the world with this form of representational democracy. It's not democracy, it's not mob rule, and it's not republicanism, it's representational democracy. It's a whole different way of which they got from the Native Americans, another one of your favorite topics. They could not have founded that brand new form of representational government, which was radically revolutionary for the time, and without learning from the Native Americans.
And with women.
And their women. Well, they didn't catch that story until a couple hundred years later.
Well, but they finally caught it now.
But you're right. That was a key element from the Native Americans that they conveniently left out. They said one revolution at a time. I think John Adams actually addressed that issue with his wife, Abigail, who wrote to him, what about the ladies? You guys are leaving out the rights of women. And he said, one revolution at a time, honey. Let's take on the king first. Give ourselves, the underlings, a little bit of rights first, and then we'll take on the ladies. Well, again, it took them a long time. But
you see, what that got us not very far.
Yeah, we still don't have representation in the Constitution.
Right.
Women are still not protected in the Constitution.
Right. And that brings me into your book, Lady Liberty. And I understood that this was a republic. When I spoke to some of my elders, and they put me on to what this government is really about, and because democracy doesn't appear in the Constitution not once. It's not. It's not once, because they didn't want mob rule. They didn't want the men in the streets to rule. They wanted. So it makes sense. But when you wrote the book Lady Liberty, my grandfather's from the Barbados, and he used to take me as a kid. One thing that I remember from him is him taking me to see the Statue of Liberty a whole lot, and I was
sweet.
A whole lot. He always took me to visit the Statue of Liberty. I didn't understand it until I was an adult, until he was gone. I was like, why is this man taking me to see this? I love the statue, but I didn't get it until. It's funny what you remember before you can speak. It's before you can form a sentence. You still have these memories in your head, and those are the memories that I have with my grandfather, that I remember him taking me to the Statue of Liberty. So when you had that book and you explained about the meaning of the Statue of Liberty, I was like, wow, this is amazing.
Yeah.
Can you go into your book about the Statue of Liberty and what the significance of the Statue of Liberty and the symbolism is about?
Sure. I'll start on it.
Give it a shot.
Yeah. Well, the Statue of Liberty, gosh, you better start this.
Where to start?
I don't know which one to start at.
Okay, well, on its face, it's also an impactful symbol, as your grandfather probably appreciated it just because of what it stands for the immigrants coming across. They're always this maternal symbol welcoming them to this land of freedom. I mean, on its face, it's a pretty cool thing to have. But when you dig deeper, in that book, we wanted to know, why is liberty, the concept of liberty, represented by a female in a country where women in 1880, when it went up in 1886, women still were not liberated. There was no rights for women. So what was the dichotomy there? Why? So you go back to the excuse me, the early Roman goddess Libertas, which is what the sculptor Bartoldi based it on. But we dug deeper and deeper, of course, because it's Hieronymus. What are you going to do? And we looked into the Native American influences as well, because that's where the thing went up. And not that, well, I have to say that the sculptor was French, I think people know that. And it was presented as a gift to the United States in honor of the centennial, the 1876 centennial. And before he designed it, he did make a tour around the United States, as much as it existed back then. The railroad was a brand new thing, the Transcontinental Railroad. So he was one of the first people to go out there as a tourist. And he did see Indians and, reservations, not a whole lot. It wasn't a big deal for him. It wasn't for anybody back then. At that time, Americans were all about, the Indians were a dead race. That's what they thought. It was time, because, the Europeans had the superior systems of all things. They had civilization, so to speak. They hadn't realized yet that the Indians, the Native Americans, whatever you want to call them, had their own civilization. And now that we can look back on it, the world benefited by the discovery of North America through food. All the different types of food that we didn't have before. That they had developed chocolate and tomatoes and potatoes and all these things that people rely on around the world now for their substance food, were developed by farmers in the Americas. The form of government, the value of women, which didn't make it through until much later, but many of them were matriarchal cultures and valued their women. So we look at all the different streams that went into this concept of depicting liberty as a woman, and put that into one book. And that was in 2016. So it's now 4 years old, and we're a little rusty on some of the facts, but
no, that's all right. You did fine.
Well, there's a lot, but mainly the symbolism of it. That is that raised arm of the Statue of Liberty. Where is it? It's in its right hand, and lifting it as it lifts up. Those who were opposed, or especially people like Trump. Trump hates it. Trump does not like the Statue of Liberty. Those who get into what the meaning of the raised arm with a torch. The torch is higher consciousness. The Statue of Liberty, by having that in the right hand, means that that's where we are headed, towards higher consciousness. Also the aspects of in the Statue of Liberty, I'm trying to find the in my head right now.
There's one right there.
Oh,
because again,
yes.
We surround ourselves.
Yeah,
She's back there behind.
There she is. Well, after you get through the higher consciousness aspect of it, my interest always has been in how to balance these things out. And she is a series of symbols and balance. We are out of balance, and that's one of the biggest problems in the world, but certainly in America at this time. We are not balanced. The male-female thing is not, but it will be. I'm certain that under this administration that's coming in, it will be.
Yes.
And that's going to change everything, because we'll become a democracy again. We will be able to do what we were supposed to do a long time ago, which is elevate world consciousness so that we don't go to war.
Right.
Because war is death, and that kind of thing. So the Statue of Liberty is that elevating of consciousness, which is needed, especially by men. then basically, no,
Yeah, that's
yeah,
right.
I'm really embarrassed about this, but I was so embarrassed about it. That's why we had to do that book.
Yeah.
And we were doing it. And we could almost cry every time when you saw every time another woman knocked down and actually regurgitated into nothingness. Well,
That's right.
so that's one of the reasons why I use symbols, because symbols lead to higher consciousness.
Right.
And you don't need to have words from that standpoint. You have, this deals with the heart. This deals with inner consciousness and higher consciousness. And we haven't, most people have not done their meditations lately or prayers and everything. But as we move towards that again, that's what the Statue of Liberty tells us to do. When you have that torch up in the right hand, means you are activating it. And the other hand, where was the other hand? The other hand was holding a book.
Right.
Was it the Bible?
No, it's not the Bible.
No, but that's what I'm saying. Was it the Bible?
It's a book of law, is what they call it.
That's right. It was the book of law.
Right.
And that was really key, because law is one of the things that is important, especially to balance in consciousness.
Right. It's like what we were saying earlier. It was designed by a French person. Remember that. And in the years preceding the design, France was going through all kinds of upheaval with their monarchy being overthrown, and then the rabble was in charge for a couple of years, and they certainly didn't want that. They wanted an American democracy ruled by law. That's what they were advocating for France. That's why they built that statue. They were trying to get the French people to model themselves after what America had done.
Right.
But that's why she's hugging that book of law, because it was really important for them to do this within a structured way, not just the rabble of democracy. Everybody gets a say. It doesn't work that way. People are too emotional.
Wow. Just the Statue of Liberty. Wow, I'm getting some feedback. 1 2 1 2. There we go. The Statue of Liberty. There's a guy named KRS-One in our culture who always talks about goddess symbolism. That's another reason why I got into this symbolism behind Statue of Liberty. KRS-One, he always talks about the rebirth of the goddess. That goddess. That's the image of the goddess is always in the dark. They don't really talk about the goddess, and they don't talk about the role of woman in our culture. But in the hip hop community, it makes more sense for us to lean towards the goddess, because we come from in the inner city, we come from single parent households. So the women control the culture. The women control the culture. It's women. It makes sense for us to lean towards the goddess. It just makes sense for us to lean towards
if you're
the goddess.
talking about the African culture, a lot of that is matriarchal too.
Yes.
Matrifocal, I'd like to say. Matriarchal is a bit of an overstatement, but matrifocal. It was focused around the woman. Right. And the women were leaders and accepted leaders in the African cultures as well as in the indigenous cultures worldwide.
Definitely.
Because they understood that that's where life comes from. And the indigenous people in this country especially would make sure that the women were in charge of when they go to war, because they were more likely to say no, because it was their sons. They know how hard it is to give birth to their sons, and to send them off to get killed for no obvious reason was something that they would reserve until it was absolutely necessary. So that makes a lot of sense. Put the women in charge of when you go to war, and you're not going to have very many wars anymore.
Yeah, I agree. How did you what do you think why do you think so many people think that the eye and the triangle is connected to an evil group that move clandestine, that moves secretly like that? Why do so many people have these beliefs in this country? Is it just I think that there needs to be more education about the symbolism that we see in society, because people take these symbols and then they run with it and cause a lot of fear, and it's unnecessary fear. And I hear it. People bring this up in conversation all the time. I don't hear it with people in academia, because I talk to a lot of people in academia, but I hear it from just the average people who may not have higher education or may not have access to the information even though we do have Google and the internet, but they still have not connected to that type of information that contradicts that. Why do you think so many people go down that road
Because
of
they
fear?
don't read.
Yeah.
Because they don't read.
Right.
Reading is not important to most people in the world.
No,
this is crazy.
Absolutely true.
But that's how we learn. We
Right.
learn from our higher people that are into higher consciousness, and we read their stuff, and that helps us grow, and then we can help other people grow as well.
And it's the power of symbols. It's a powerful symbol. I think people react to it because they may not understand it, but it's a powerful symbol.
Sure is.
And it has been because of fiction. I think some powerful fiction got out there, and some powerful conspiracy theorists got out there, and were repeated and repeated and repeated until they became their own truth. Especially in the internet culture, you see those mistakes over and over again. With the Statue of Liberty, was based on a black model of a statue of a black freed slave. It's a great story, but there's no truth in it. I mean, they'll show a couple of examples, but if you dig it out, it's that statue that you see represented over and over again was created just in the last century. It's not that old, so it certainly wasn't a preview. But it's the Freemasons. I think it's the fear of the Freemasons, and that is a really tough nut to crack. Why are people so afraid of the Freemasons?
They do great charity work, people. They do great charity work. Stop it.
Good work. I know.
Yes.
They
do it quietly too.
That opens them up for all kinds of misconceptions. But judge them by what they do. They do a lot of good work.
I'm not a Freemason. I am a co-Mason. Co-Masons work with women. And I'll tell you, our rituals, women are so good at it. Their memories. I've worked with men and I've worked with women in this particular area. And the women understand it. They live it. They actually don't have to look at anything, read anything. It's all memorized. That they've done it so many times. And it's what makes a very big difference. But most people do not read today. As now we're finding out, as of course, that some people aren't writing anymore. No cursive writing. Whoa, geez, a whiz. We're going to have different cultures all around the world with that one.
Yes.
Because most people know how to do cursive writing.
Yeah, that's true.
But
the literacy rate is low.
We're losing our involvement in that. But going back to eye in a triangle, there's a whole thing about gypsies and the sacred eye, and that eye can be used for evil. I think that when people think of that eye as being evil, they remember all of those things we were told a long time ago about the gypsies, especially. And when they moved in the neighborhoods, they would actually steal, take everything, that kind of problem. They kind of emphasize the dark side of it all. But that's not actually what the eye in the triangle is. The eye in the triangle is that threeness is you could say that triangle is not just male or female, it's both.
Right.
And that's where we're headed. We are headed in a world where there aren't just two sexes.
Right.
There are multiple sexes.
Right. I understand exactly what you're saying.
And so that makes a very big difference.
Right.
And understanding when you get into higher consciousness, especially, you stay open to those things that are positive. And when you see something that's darker, you steer clear of it. Hey, that sounds like part of the Yellow Submarine. Steering clear. So it's truly complicated that one symbol can be used for so many things. But the reason why I got into only the male-female counterpart, because our rituals were balanced in energy. And I figured, as many of the others felt, that Freemasonry had to be masculine, and that's what it is. So I love what they do. I've been close friends with many of them, but they also know that there's a different aspect of it when you bring the male, female together in ritual together. It's very powerful.
Right, definitely. Wow.
But
And
most people don't know it exists.
yeah,
I mean, when I say to someone, I'm a co-mason, they have no idea what I'm talking about. And but some Freemasons do. And there's various levels of consciousness in Freemasonry as you grow. But I've always found them to be very positive people.
Me too.
Because they're trying to make a better world,
Right.
and they are doing it with all the things they have in raising funds for, especially for the children.
Yeah.
Because they look out for children, and they look out for we got to look out for the children, and we got to look out for our elders.
Right.
Because that's a hard thing to do, but we gotta. And if we do this, then we're going to have a yellow submarine, which we'll get into talking about in a little while, and why it is so important, because it is higher consciousness. All the symbols that they use, from the color of yellow being intelligence, higher consciousness, wisdom, divine wisdom, those things are what the yellow submarine literally are focused on. But it's hidden. It's hidden in the symbols. They don't go around talking about that aspect of it. Would you say that?
No, but all around the world, people know that. As soon as they see, something like my earrings, if I were in China, a child would start singing to me, "We all live in a yellow submarine." That refrain is known pretty much around the world. It's a very catchy tune. And I think people subconsciously, it makes them happy, because to think that we are all living in the same place.
Right.
We're all one people. We're all on one planet. We are all in this together. And I think the song, which came out in 1966, was catchy enough and was, unusual enough. It's not your traditional pop song about "I love you" and "I want to hold your hand." It's none of that. So it opened up for a lot of interpretation. People started to wonder, what is this yellow submarine? What does it mean? Is it a drug? Is it because the Beatles are trying to get us to take drugs? It must be a drug. It's a pill capsule. That's what it is. Oh, yes, I've got it figured out. Paul is dead, and they just went off on the rails on interpreting this song.
Totally misinterpreted.
And that led into the movie, which didn't come out until 1968. Of course, people misinterpreted it, and Bob among them. Went off on a tangent on what this means and what it symbolized and what the Beatles were trying to say by making this movie. It wasn't until 20 years later that he discovered the Beatles didn't make this movie.
Yes, this was a big shock the first time I saw
it. And then the artists who did make it didn't have any of these things in mind. They had such a small window of time to produce this movie because the Beatles were at the top of their game. And the producers were worried that they would fade in popularity. It's funny to look back on that and think that in 1967, they actually thought the Beatles would fade in popularity, but they did. So they hurried up to get this cranked out in less than a year, which is something unheard of in the world of animation features. It takes Disney 4 years to put out an animated feature-length film. But they did this in 11 months. Wow. And even more incredibly, without a script, something else you cannot do in animation. You have to have the recording of the voices before you can put the pictures down. But they couldn't decide on the script, so they kept throwing one script out after another, recording and then throwing out the recordings. So technically, it was made in far less than 11 months because the first couple months were lost waiting for scripts. And that's when they started to illustrate the songs. They still didn't know what the dialogue was going to be, but they took that song that was approved, "When I'm 64." And this would probably interest your viewers because they decided between the people who were making it, that would be the animation director, Bob Balser, and the designer, Heinz Edelman. They decided to illustrate that song, "When I'm 64," as an inspection of time travel, basically. There's a lot of references to time in this movie. It starts out right at the beginning, once upon a time, or maybe twice. It's a very cute little thing to say, but it makes you start thinking right away about the linear nature of time. And is it really ABC? Einstein would say it's not ABC. It's not A to Z. It's happening in an eternal now. Everything that has happened is still happening. Everything that will happen in the future is happening right now. There's a parallel universe. Every decision you make starts a whole nother universe. Lovely quantum things that were not being talked about in 1967 when they were making the film. And yet they got them in the movie. I don't know what they were thinking. They've got a parallel universe. They've got, in that sea of time, they've got that other yellow submarine that they pass as they're going backwards in time. And they look out the window and they say, look, it's us. It must be us in another universe going backwards in time. So it's interesting how they got all that in there. That's the sea of time. And then they go into the sea of science, as they called it. Again, with no script at all. They start examining the nature of space in much the same way. There's a lot of quantum theories in there, too. They have a cube. The Yellow Submarine goes through this area and it turns into a cube. And all these vibrational things start happening as the faces flicker in and out, with a waveform representing the song Only a Northern Song comes on for that bit. And they have the waveform, and that's a pretty noisy song. It gets very loud and dissonant at points. And then the cube breaks up and it turns into a nucleus, like a cell, and goes through all the platonic solids. So it's quite a fabulous examination of the flexible nature of space. Right. Again, something that people hadn't really started thinking about until maybe the 90s or the 2000s, with quantum theory became more popular. Right. But everything is vibration. That can really be interpreted in that one scene, the sea of science.
Vibration.
Yeah, all things. That's an ancient theory.
Yes. It goes all the way back vibration. To Greek.
Right.
Yeah. Well, let me just say one thing to my audience, that the Yellow Submarine is a cartoon, an animated cartoon that was put out about the Beatles. They took some of their music and they put the music inside the film, but the film has some deeper meanings and some definitely some different symbols, and just dealt with a whole lot of different things in the animated cartoon. It just wasn't just a regular cartoon. This cartoon was deep, and so this is what we're talking about. If you didn't see Yellow Submarine, I'm going to have a link in the description underneath so you can see it, because you really need to see that. You need to see the movie and you need to get the book inside the Yellow Submarine. It's definitely dope.
If you haven't seen the movie yet or recently, go watch it, because this interview will make a lot more sense to you after you do. Come back and watch it again, listen to it again.
Well, it's a very uplifting film. Mm-hmm. It brings people together, and for good reasons. And so I think that at this particular time in history, which I've said 5,000 times before, that this is the time. It is this is the time for it. Even though it was created a long time ago, some things happen periodically. They're weak at first, then they get stronger. And again and again and again, they get stronger and stronger before people really begin to understand them. Like, I was so happy when I first saw the film, because I thought the Beatles were all geniuses. I thought that they were the ones that wrote the film. And, I think just about everybody must have been thinking that, because they wouldn't allow anybody to know who really did the film. Now, being an artist, I kind of feel strongly towards the guys that created the film, that since they were underpaid, overworked, and all that other kind of stuff, but they loved what they did. They really did. And they created something that will go down, I don't know what to say, in history, but...
Well, it already
has.
Definitely. Here we are 50 years later talking about a cartoon.
There are too many films that are like that from that standpoint.
You also, I want to tell my audience about this. You also painted a Volkswagen that was at Woodstock, and got really popular. Let me tell you something. I love the 60s. Just that hippie movement, just Woodstock. It's just something about that era. Jimi Hendrix, Janis Joplin. I have a friend of mine. His name is Chef Antonio. We always talk about that. He always telling me about the 60s. And then I had a good friend. His parents was at Woodstock. So I always was like, dang. I always heard stories about Woodstock. And that Volkswagen, I seen it. Before I even knew about Dr. Hieronimus, I seen that Volkswagen. Yay. And I always wondered in my head, who painted that damn Volkswagen? Where did that Volkswagen come from? Years later, I found out that you painted this Volkswagen and you redid it. Tell us the story about how y'all got a new Volkswagen and painted it and stuff like that, so forth.
Boy.
Before you launch into that, let me just tell people that was it's not your typical hippie painted bus.
It
you
isn't.
know,
That's right.
people know the painted bus, the Volkswagen bus with all the flowers and the peace symbols and the hearts. That's your Hallmark version.
Mhm.
But Bob's art is all very meaningful. Every symbol has a book you could write about it, why it was there, and what was put on it. So it was photographed at Woodstock in 1969 with some people sitting on top of it, friends of Bob's who were up at Woodstock. And that picture is used very often in Woodstock articles and books and movies because it says Woodstock. You know, there's all these occult esoteric symbols on a VW with hippies on top of it. Now, what made you paint that bus was the question.
Well, I had a friend who was a musician, and he was a singer in a band called Light. And he said to me, I want you to paint me a magic bus.
Wow.
Now, he was not fooling around when he's saying magic bus, because he knew that I do and can work in that aspect of it. And so that's what I created for him. I created a bus that tells the story basically of that we are all one people on one planet, and we need to work together. And that's the key to what our country was supposed to be about. But we've gone off to the other side, but we're going to move them back in the center again.
Pendulum.
So Bob Grimm, who became almost, well, he was one of the Four Seasons at one time. He was the guy that said, I'll give you $1,000, but you got to paint me a magic bus. And I did. And after that, I didn't pay any attention to it for decades. I had no idea. It became huge. It is a world symbol now. It is not just this little Baltimore town of that. It is a world symbol because of the stories that it tells. Right on the front is a big sphinx. When you see a sphinx, what is a sphinx? A sphinx is animal and human at the same time. Human head, animal body. What is it saying? It's saying basically that you have to live in higher consciousness. You must go inside. It's not on the outside. It's on the inside of us. We all have it. Right. It's universal. And it doesn't make, of course, it makes no difference what color your skin is.
Exactly.
It's really sad to think that kind of stuff is still being discussed. Yeah, I mean, back in 65, I thought we had heard just about the end of that kind of crap. Excuse me, I guess I couldn't use that word.
That's fine.
But I mean, I found it a little bit offensive. So the Sphinx then means that the human head on time of an animal body that is higher consciousness controls the physical world and the animal instincts, which we all have. Right. I mean, we're all born with this kind of thing. That's right. So knowing that, and then you find out what's going on in today in the world of not astrology, I almost said, but in the study of Egypt, what we are finding out many times, we were told that there were hidden things within the Sphinx. Underneath the Sphinx is right Paul, according to Edgar Casey, is going to be found the history of Atlantis and all the knowledge of where we all came from. Now, most people laughed at that for a long time, but they ain't laughing no more. Yeah. Because they've come very close to looking under that pall of the right Sphinx. Right? But there's always somebody in Egypt that says, no, you can't do that. Yeah. Because as soon as they do that, they know that all of a sudden Egypt is more than Egypt. Right. Egypt is the world. Right. Is that, Atlantis, right, and all in other different levels of meaning. This kind of stuff opens hearts. And when you bring people together in love, the way the Beatles are talking about, because the Beatles may or may not have known this, but in Egypt there is a scarab-headed god.
A beetle.
Yeah, definitely.
A beetle god.
Yeah.
B-E-E-L-E-L.
Right. Now, were they aware of this? They may have been. The reason why I say
that's a good question.
Because Paul McCartney and John Lennon These guys are very smart.
Definitely.
And they had friends that owned bookstores, and they would give them the books. I mean, or of course, at first they would come in and say, "I'll buy this, that." And oh, you don't have. Then they became friends with the people, and so that they always had a supply of higher consciousness, and they were always reading new stuff, and that really does make a difference. That's because most people don't read anymore.
Yeah,
as we've mentioned a little bit on.
Just to tie back into Egypt, but first of all, the Woodstock bus, as you noted, has been recreated in 2018 for the 50th anniversary of Woodstock, which was actually 2019. We were contacted by a documentary film company, and they said, "Let's go find it. It's lost." The original Woodstock bus, Bob painted dozens of VWs and bugs and buses alike. So this was just one of many for him. That's why he was able to say, "I'd forgotten all about it." Right. He lived in a commune at the time, the Savitria commune, and it was used to go pick up groceries until it fell apart. And it was communally owned, and nobody can remember what happened to it. It was probably traded into the mechanic for another one that he painted later, but they didn't keep excellent records. You kept pretty good records. I shouldn't say you didn't. But that particular one piece of information was missing. So it's possible that that vehicle still exists somewhere in somebody's backyard, which is what one of our trusted psychics told us. And we went off on a search for it. So this documentary films them looking for it and then deciding to recreate it in time for the 50th anniversary, which we did successfully. It's beautiful, and it's all Light VW Bus actually is the website, lightvwbus.com, that tells that whole story. And
it took about 3 years.
Yeah, it was a long project.
And it was a long project, and that certainly interfered with the book on the Yellow Submarine.
Because they happened at the same time. So their 50th anniversaries happened at the same time. And we were already involved with Woodstock, so it delayed our Yellow Submarine book coming out. But if you like the 60s, you'll love this book, because chapter 1 is all about swinging London in the 60s. That was the white-hot epicenter of where things were changing. And that's where they were when they were making this movie. They were right there in Soho, which is the seedy sort of area in central London, right a few blocks away from Carnaby Street, the famous place where people were buying the brand new mini skirts and the fashions of the time. And a few streets away from where the Beatles were editing their own film, Magical Mystery Tour. One of the reasons they weren't too involved in Yellow Submarine, by the way, they had their own film to work on. And then they went off to India for a couple of months at the height of production. So they were gone. There's an interesting parallel there. They were exploring meditation, as you know, in India, and learning how to go within and go to that deep, quiet place within, the nothingness. And that's the sort of center point of the film. Another parallel, synchronistic parallel. The submarine is traveling through these strange seas of illusion, and eventually, in one very unusual twist, they're in this sea full of monsters, and one monster sucks up the actual film. He sucks up everything in the plot, including the submarine, and then he sucks up the edge of the film, and the whole film disappears. It goes white, a white screen, and then out pops the Yellow Submarine, as if the submarine itself was able to protect them from this oblivion, from disappearing into nothingness. And they meet there the little man called the Nowhere Man, and they sing him that song, "He's a Real Nowhere Man." And we interpret that, because if you listen to the song, the harmony of the song at the very beginning, he's a real nowhere man. So it's the first time that John Lennon was playing with the term real no. You know, he's real no. And you can break that word apart. Nowhere can also be now here. So this little man that they find, this little character, the Nowhere Man, they call him the Boob. He's the Nowhere Man. He's the now here man. He's all here, all present now. And Bob interprets him as the sixth sense. We've got the four Beatles plus the captain in the submarine. So there's five of them. The five physical senses are joined now by the sixth sense. And suddenly they can do a lot more with this little tiny character, the Nowhere Man. And they find him in this desert of nowhere. There's nothing there, which is very similar to what you're trying to achieve in those higher states of meditation.
Right.
To get beyond yourself into the outer world and the inner world. It's all the same thing. You know, it's a nowhere place. No place, no physical, no time, nothing. we look at the Yellow Submarine far deeper than the people who made the submarine.
Wow.
I
love
think
this.
we
I
can
have
say
to
that.
they didn't mean to do this. They just were making it up as they went along, but they
Wow.
were very well-read individuals. So
And they all felt the same about this project
mhm.
of bringing people together, and love is all you need, et cetera, et cetera. As corny as most people like to think that is, it's true. It is, because of what that kind of consciousness does. When you unite, all of a sudden you become a very strong, powerful being inside. Externally, you can also, but that can get you into real trouble.
Right.
So going inside is the key to go before you can understand the larger perspective. Let's put it that way.
I found out meditation was important. I had got a book called. I'm getting feedback again. 1 2 1 2. I had got a book called Biofeedback, where they brought a guy named Swami Rama in the lab, and they hooked up electrodes to his head and measured his brain waves underneath meditation. I got that when I was 12 years old, and that's when I knew
Whoa.
that meditation was really important, because I was looking, because I was into science at 12. I wanted to be a scientist. That was my goal. But then I said, there's some answers that's not being, there's some questions that's not being answered. So when I got that book, that was that's when I realized that knowledge is an ongoing thing. Scientists are coming up with these ideas as they do research and go in the lab. And the thing with Swami Rama, he was the first to demonstrate that you can control your involuntary states, like your breathing and stuff like that. He was the first to demonstrate that scientifically. Right. And then years ago, I started working at a bookstore called East West Books, and I tucked that book away. I tucked my books away. I have a lot. I was like, it was several years later, but that book meant so much to me that I just buried it. And so in my library. And so one day I worked at East West Books, and I said, you know what? My gut intuition, I was like, did a guy named Swami Rama build this bookstore? They was like, yeah. I was like, I have his book from when I was 12 years old. I brung it in. It's out of print. I said, I hope they don't come get me and lock me up. Because I never returned it to the bookstore. I loved it so much. Sorry, I never did it again. I promise.
Closure.
But and I showed it to the Himalayan Institute people, and they was like, how did you get? I said, I had this at 12 years old. I don't even know. This is a weird coincidence that I end up. Swami Rama had died, but had passed on. Let me say that. And I got there too late, but the synchronicity was still there.
About that.
That's extraordinary.
And consciousness is something they can't really study in the lab, and that's what's missing from science. You're so right. But they're making progress. People like Dean Radin, I'm sure you've followed his work, and William Tiller, and they can scientifically prove the health benefits from meditation.
Definitely.
Mm-hmm.
You live longer, heart rate goes down, blood pressure, all those things.
Yeah, I have a book called Zen in the Brain.
Yeah,
Zen in the Brain.
But also, I think you find out what is really important about what you're here to do. You have to listen. Like Bob says, prayer is talking, but meditation is listening. To listen to that inner voice, the higher God, whatever you want to call it, yourself or your higher being.
It's your higher
guardian
self.
angel, your higher self. That's where the messages come through. When you're sleeping and when you're meditating, you're doing it on purpose.
Right.
And you can guide that.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's okay. I was just going to try to tie it back to the Yellow Submarine. And
no. Before I forget, we're gonna go back to it. But before I forget, what does your name mean? What does Hieronimus mean? It's just such a great name.
Oh boy. Well, it's going to sound like.
Tell them what it means.
All right, it means holy name.
Hieronimus.
Hieronimus.
Yeah. What language does that come from?
Well, you would probably find most of the Hieronymi long ago in Germany.
Oh, wow.
Over there.
Yeah.
It's a Greek name, isn't it?
It is Greek.
Oh, okay.
Yes, it's Greek.
You were adopted into the Greek fraternity because of his name.
Yes, because being a little white-haired person They always wanted to have a white-haired person in their community, and that's why they pulled me in there.
Wow.
And learning about the Greek traditions was really kind of interesting.
Wow.
And I wish they were more balanced in the male-female aspect of it, but that they have a worse problem there than most organizations people do.
I think that this book, Inside the Yellow Submarine, is important because it's introducing a new generation who might not be exposed to what the Beatles had to offer and what they were about. Because, I think that, especially the hip hop community, I think that we need to go and revisit that whole quote unquote counterculture, that movement in the '60s that was so strong that, broke down some of the obstacles that society was throwing out there. Like the social structure was it was so much chaos in the '60s. There was so much things going on in the '60s that was being broken down by these that movement. I hate to say that. Well, the hippie movement. They broke down a lot of barriers, and I think
people are dissing the boomers these days.
Yeah,
as not enough or whatever. But I was watching a film just by accident yesterday of some protesters at UC Berkeley, where a lot of protests started in California, where these kids were being dragged down marble steps by the cops. They were being gunned by fire hoses. These were white kids who were protesting the social movement of the giving the blacks some freedom. They were out there being horribly abused on the line. They were doing just as much protest as happening now, and for different reasons. And just like during the American Revolution, you can only do so much. The power structure was such as it was in the 50s, was really locked in.
Yeah.
Only white men are allowed to exceed anywhere.
Yeah.
And, very slowly through athletics and through entertainment, those barriers were broken down. But in society, it took those type of live demonstrations.
Yes.
The Vietnam War really instigated a lot of them, because the kids were getting shipped off to be slaughtered for no apparent reason until they stood up and started burning the draft cards. So yeah, they really shook things up. They really did make a lot of positive change. You can only make so much change, a little at a time. Social change takes a long time, but it starts with one person changing their mind at one moment. Every moment in every day of everyone's life makes a difference.
When did you start writing this book, Inside the Yellow Submarine? And when did you say, all right, it's time for another book? It's time to drop it.
That's the title of the first volume. Inside the Yellow Submarine is the first volume. That one came out in 2002. And what we've got coming out now is called It's All in the Mind.
All in the Mind. Wow.
All in the Mind. This is volume 2 of Inside the Yellow Submarine.
Right.
And it's quite literally going to the printers today. We just finished the final proof corrections, so it should be ready to ship out right after Christmas, by the end of the year. It's a 2021 publication, but we're just finishing it up now. And as Bob was saying, it's a feel-good book about a feel-good movie.
Yeah,
and the younger generation may not have discovered the Beatles yet, but I encourage them to do so, because their music is infectious. It's harmonic. Their harmonies are absolutely beautiful.
Definitely.
Their lyrics are uplifting for the most part. They're all about loving one another, and they're funny. Some of the plays on words are very funny, and you can dance to them. So I think that they pass the generations. There's new Beatles fans being born every day, and then this film captured them at the height of their beauty. In 1967, they had just come out with Sgt. Pepper's, which revolutionized everything in music. Again, making things different than the way people made them before. A double album. Nobody had ever done that before. Music that wasn't about love. What is this? I don't understand this. Music about Mr. Kite. What are you talking about? But everybody loved it and started doing new things and trying and being experimental. And that's what this movie was basically started as it captured them at that time. So they look like they do on the cover of Sgt. Pepper's. And it tells the story, as we say, of a land called Pepperland, where everybody's happy and lives in harmony, and they sing and they dance just like they're living in a park. But then they show you up on the mountain are these creatures called the Blue Meanies, who hate music and harmony. So they come down and attack Pepperland. They launch the Yellow Submarine to go get help. And the Yellow Submarine lands in Liverpool, picks up the Beatles, brings them back, and they have a war. Now, this is important. The war is not with guns.
That's right.
It's with music and flowers. And I'm going to let Bob give the important part about the movie is not that they defeat their enemies.
Yes. Instead of defeating them, they elevated their consciousness. And it really came about through that little guy called
the boob,
the
nowhere man,
the sixth guy, right, which was higher consciousness. And
they transformed the enemy,
yes,
into friends.
Nobody was killed. They transformed them in the sense of elevating their awareness. That is the future of a Pepperland.
We are all one.
That we are all one.
Yeah.
And so
with music and with love, those are the two elements that they use to overcome them. Yeah. It's not just music, it has to be love magic. They use both. They were able to overcome their enemies. But then at the very end of the film, the live Beatles come on and they talk directly to the camera. And John Lennon says, "But look, there's newer and bluer meanies. I've just sighted them in the vicinity of this new theater. So we all have to go out singing." So it encourages the viewers to go out singing the song all together now. And we're all together now. So you know that you can vanquish your enemies through love and through music because everybody feels that in their heart and the rhythm and wants to get dancing and love one another. But you have to also be on the lookout for newer meanies because they're always going to crop up. Everything happens over and over. We're in a cycle now where the pendulum swings one way, swings the other way. So you have to stay vigilant and do your homework and stay on top of your conscious self and look around for those blue meanies as they come in. George Harrison said they've invaded the music industry.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, this is definitely a story that's important to the hip hop world, because we see that all the time. We can recognize these characters in real time in real life. Like we had a gentleman who we didn't hate the guy or anything, but we just thought that he wasn't on the same wavelength, and that guy was Ed Koch. Rest in peace to him. He's no longer here, but he at the time in the early 80s, he was that guy that didn't really understand the youth culture and didn't know how to guide it to where it needs to be. He didn't help with that. He just talk down to it and criminalize it basically. But and then today you still have these people who they just see the commercial aspect of the culture rather than they're not tapping into his ability to heal the world. They're tapping into the negative aspects of the kids living in the inner city and are desperate to make some money. Let me just be honest. And they'll pick these artists that don't have a message but have great selling ability, and then they just repeat this process over and over again. So this story is very important. Yeah, this story is very important to hip hoppers who want to look for some inspiration and see what the earlier groups were doing and what they were about. Because the Beatles, John Lennon, Ringo was a great drummer, man.
Really?
Ringo was a badass drummer. I already studied him. He was a really good drummer. And so as well as crafting their skills, I think that John Lennon and Paul McCartney and all of those guys made great music that helped heal the world and became the backdrop for a lot of the protests that was done in the 60s and the early 60s and the late 60s. They didn't just do music. They were into they were concerned about the world, just not making money. Even so that's what.
Well, I was very impressed when Hendrix decided to do some of the Beatles songs.
Wow.
That showed a real important link there. Because when Hendrix really made it first in England,
right? That's right.
And it was terrible for him here.
Yeah.
But after England, and they realized that this guy was one of the greatest players of all time. But he had an inside, which is all inside of him, was higher consciousness, which he felt was the key to everything and which he was trying to do. But how do you do that when you have to make your music for people that he had to make for. He had big problems with the people that controlled him, who did not want him to go in the directions that he did later on, because they said to him, hey, it's not going to make us enough money. Right. And he said, well, I don't care if it doesn't make us enough money. This is what I want to do.
Right.
And those are, very, very first time I was going to do record album covers when I was up in New York City. And they were the people that introduced me to Jimmy. And you know how much they were going to pay me for an album cover?
Wow, I can imagine.
$100.
Wow, I'm not surprised.
It takes me weeks. My work takes a long time because it's telling a story, and every time I tell a story, I want it to be an uplifting thing, and it's not an easy thing to do all the time. But I think that's really where Jimmy was so hurt so many times by the people he was forced to work with. I was only with him several times, but at the same time, he impressed me so deeply as being kind. Like walking along the streets in New York, and somebody who is not having a good time is sitting on a curb and crying. And Jimmy goes over and says, he sits down next to him and said, what's wrong, man? And they unload, and he says, it's okay, man. It's okay. You can get through this, and da-da-da-da-da. And his people, who are his controllers, are not very happy about this. What are you doing sitting down? This guy, who are you sitting next to? You don't even know this guy. We are off to go to somewhere else. You got to come with us. No, I've got to spend time with this guy. That's the kind of person he was. And you can't, in the rock and roll world, you can't do that to your bosses very often. So there's possibility that when Jimmy left, he didn't leave on his own accord. There's a real mess there, but I'm not going to get into now. But I've always felt that he was murdered.
Yeah, I heard people say that. He's not the only person with that opinion. I heard that before. What was he into symbolism?
Oh yes, totally, totally. I mean, he was so far ahead of everybody. I mean, that's why a lot of people. I just love his music, but I don't understand why he's doing it.
Yeah, Bob will tell the story about in a nightclub where he was sent to observe in order to design the album covers. It was a very small nightclub called The Scene, I think.
Yeah, The Scene.
Where they would go after their shows to jam, and Jimmy was playing up there with, I don't know, Clapton and Beck, I don't know. And then he came over to look at Bob's table, and Bob, of course, travels everywhere with all his books. He had his sketch pads out, and he was drawing stuff, and the eye and the triangle, of course. So we were just talking about that. And Jimmy's like, hey, I know that symbol. What's that all about? And they started talking about it, and what's it mean? And
that was the key to our relationship.
That's what made him bond. That symbol. Isn't that interesting?
He said, we're going to find out, Bob. We're going to find out what this means, because nobody else seems to really know.
And, he was an artist, too. And in some of his work that his sister has put out, Jimi Hendrix, who's a good friend of Bob's now, some of the books they've put out in the retrospectives of Hendrix unreleased material include his artwork and his sketches. And in some of his sketches, there's the eye in the triangle.
There it is. Yes.
Wow.
Probably dated right after he saw you.
Could be. But there was a thrill to see that. It really was. Because, you don't get to spend much time with these
He was
people.
deep. Hendrix was one of the few that was very into symbols, as you say.
What about Janis Joplin?
And, of course, he had at least 2 experiences with UFOs.
Yeah.
Really?
One real important one out there in Hawaii.
Wow.
Just like it wasn't like John Lennon's experience in his hotel at that time.
John Lennon had a very close encounter, which he talked about openly when he did his album Walls and Bridges in 1974. He was separated from Yoko at the time, living with May Pang, and they both saw it. It was right outside the balcony of their high-rise. Wow. It was right there in the middle of New York City. And a lot of people saw it. He called in and he reported it, and he was told by the police that a lot of people had seen it and reported it. It was hovering there, one of those slow-moving sightings, not one of the fast ones. Wow. And then he wrote it in the album. You look it up in his Walls and Bridges album. On such and such a date, I saw a UFO.
That's
It's pretty
crazy.
cool.
And of course, now UFOs are accepted.
Yeah.
I mean, this is a major breakthrough because we have other beings on this planet that have very high consciousness that are not from here, and they are looking for people whose consciousness is higher. Why? Because they are concerned about our weather. They are concerned about our planet. And they know that if you see a person whose aura carries their energy field, that's how they understand us. They don't have to talk to us. They see us, and they know through the pinks, the greens, and the other things that are in your aura, or if they see those dark blacks and browns and things like that, that's a person you steer clear of. So they need help, and they're looking for humans to help. And they're not necessarily going to get involved with the aliens, but they're going to clean up our country. That's what it's all about, in part.
Have you heard?
We're in a really strange time in which our planet's in danger. We have things flying through space. I'm not talking about just UFOs, but we have rocks in space, which have almost hit us many times.
Wow.
And I think we'll find out that we were almost demolished a couple of times, but it was the ETs that stopped it. There are at least, I know I don't expect you to believe me in this, but
I'm very open-minded.
For a long time. One of the key, what did you say?
He's very open-minded.
Oh, well, but other people get very upset to realize that are they good or bad? Most of them are good. There's at least 86 different types. They're all spread out through the universe. I mean, there's life everywhere. And that's going to be an important thing for us to learn, as other people are thinking, well, there's nowhere else to go. There's plenty of other places that we can, and we're going to be forced.
And that's what we should be focused on instead of these petty little wars. Now, I know we're almost out of time, but I want to just one more loop it back to the Yellow Submarine. YellowSubmarineBook.com, by the way, is how to get the book. But we got UFOs in there too. We got UFOs because there's a UFO in the movie.
That's right.
At one point, when Ringo's being followed in Liverpool by the Yellow Submarine, he says, "I think that may have been an unidentified flying cupcake." And then he says, "No, it must have been a figment of my imagination," because that's what people usually do when they're confronted with something that's outside their frame of reality.
That's right.
So YellowSubmarineBook.com, can't be more simple than that. That's how you can get a copy of the new book. And right now it's on sale, pre-sale discount. And we're giving away all kinds of collector cards, like these little Beatles collector cards.
That's mad cool.
Yeah, and little Yellow Submarine cards that have images from the film in them. If you order before December 31st, and if you say you saw it here on the Super Longevity Institute Maitreya 1 program, we'll send you some extra bonus prizes just for being a listener.
That's wonderful. Thank you for sharing that and coming on the show. I can talk to y'all for hours.
No doubt.
It's a lot of fun talking to you.
Yes.
You obviously are really opened up.
Definitely. And I'm
it's
so
pouring
glad.
through you.
Well, good work that you're doing, getting the word out.
The more love you give out is the more you're going to get back. And you know that, but you don't depend on it. You don't do it for that reason, but it's natural.
Definitely.
Helping people is a natural thing to do, and it gives you good karmic points, but that's not the reason why you do it.
That's right. That's right.
It creates peace and love, and obviously that's what we're trying to emphasize.
Yeah.
Can you show the book one more time to my audience? Thank you.
It's still in 3-ring binder form for me, but
no, that's dope. You're getting a look before it's even printed. It's dope.
There's the cover.
It's all in your mind.
It's all and I'm gonna try to get that center. There we go.
Wow, beautiful. That's gonna be the cover. That's gonna be amazing.
And that was designed by that was Heinz Edelman, the artist.
The person who designed the movie designed the cover of our book. Because he was a friend of Dr. Bob's, of course.
Crazy. Wonderful. Well, thank you for coming on the show. I enjoyed your company. This was I'm glad we got this in before the Christmas holiday. Happy holidays to you and your loved ones. I definitely would like to hear back from y'all, and y'all come back on the show if you have anything you want to do, you want to say. Please, my doors are open to both of y'all, and I really appreciate y'all coming on the show. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, maybe you'll join us on our show too.
I will. Oh yeah.
What you're doing is so important. It really is. And no matter what, just stay positive. We're gonna win. We have to. We will.
Thank you. I will. And you can hit them on 21stcenturyradio2.com. I had to plug that in. But we're out. This is Super Longevity Institute podcast. Laura Cortner and Dr. Hieronimus, thank you for coming on the show. Happy holidays. See you in the new year.
Peace and love. I'm trying to get there.
God,
there we go. Peace and love.
He's really a great guy.
Yeah.